Hi, I'm Douglas Mason, President and CEO of Rainy Mountain Royalty Corp., RMO, on the TSX Venture Exchange. Rainy Mountain's Brunswick property is located in the Rideout Shear Zone in Ontario, with grab samples running as high as 32 grams per ton gold. A follow-up drill program to test numerous targets located by recent groundwork is planned for early 2018. Please visit our website at rmroyalty.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is James Corbett, publisher of the CorbettReport.com and editorial writer for the International Forecaster. He's speaking to us from Japan, where he has worked and lived since 2004. Welcome back to the show, James.
Thank you so much for having me back. It's always a pleasure.
Chinese President Xi is now able to be dictator for life. Do you think he's going to be one?
I think he's going to try to be. I don't imagine there's any other possible reason why they would actually make a constitutional amendment to make sure that this is possible unless President Xi Jinping was planning on using it. So yes, for people who don't know, the Chinese government has amended the constitution so that it removed the two-term presidential limit, which has previously kept Chinese presidents to 10 years, 2 5-year terms. But Xi Jinping is in his second 5-year term, and, well, that's not going to be a problem for him come 5 years from now when the changeover would have occurred, because apparently I think Xi is intending to stay on. Of course, what is really happening in the Chinese Communist Party is always a kind of Game of Thrones scenario, so who knows what may happen in the meantime and who might oust whom and what may happen politically, but I think Xi Jinping is certainly intending to use this to his advantage and maintain his position.
Well, the glorious leader of North Korea brags that he killed hundreds of generals to get his job. I'm sure Xi would be willing to do the same thing to keep it.
Well, unfortunately, politics is a dirty business, and I think most of the people who get into positions of power like that are the types of people who will do anything to keep that power, and, well, here's just another example of it.
It looks like there's going to be a major trade war in the U.S. Trump just announcing that he won't allow major U.S. companies to be taken over by a Chinese company, and now a source close to us has said that he's heard that Trump is also going to put restrictions on Chinese companies investing in the U.S., and he's about to put huge tariffs on Chinese clothing and consumer goods.
All of that would not come as a surprise to me. I think it remains to be seen because we have heard that we've been hearing this type of rhetoric since Trump got into office, and as I pointed out at the time, the Trump cabinet was stacked heavily with people who are China hawks in various ways and have been agitating for trade war with China. So if this does come about, I don't think it can be seen as a total surprise. I don't think this is something that's going to contribute to the overall health of global trade or the global economic outlook. But at any rate, it does seem at least that much more credible now that we have those the steel tariffs as kind of a perhaps a harbinger of things that are going to be happening in the latter half of Trump's first term.
China owns a lot of U.S. Treasuries. Are they risky?
It's difficult to, well, I would say not in the way that some people might frame it. It's sometimes been called China's nuclear option, that they could just dump all their treasuries overnight and cause the U.S. dollar to tank or something along those lines. I don't think that's a realistic scenario because, I mean, there's always a buyer on the other end of that transaction. So, if they're just dumping $1 trillion of treasuries overnight, who's buying and in what context? Secondly, of course, it means that China is ultimately giving up on all of those reserves and essentially abandoning the international monetary paradigm as it exists by trying to tank the U.S. dollar. I don't think we're quite there yet. Now, I do see in the coming decade, certainly we're going to be seeing China moving more boldly, I would say, in the monetary area in terms of making the yuan more of a international player. But still, that would mean loosening some of their capital controls and allowing more investment into China and other things that the Chinese Communist Party is not exactly keen on. So I think we're still a long way from China really using their so-called nuclear option and actually dumping their treasury.
With the steel and aluminum tariffs, is Japan really affected by that?
I don't think it's a huge burden on the Japanese economy at this point, but I do know that the Japanese government is lobbying for an exemption for the tariffs for the steel and aluminum industry here. So, but given Kobe Steel and its prominence in the news lately, maybe it's actually a smart move on the U.S. behalf.
What's happening there at Kobe?
Have not heard the latest. Last that I heard, they had identified some of the parts on the Shinkansen, the bullet train here, that was affected by this shoddy steel that had been falsely fabricated. The safety data had been fabricated, and I know that the Kobe Steel chief has actually stepped down. The CEO quit after a government probe into what's going on there. But other than that, I haven't heard the latest in terms of what Kobe Steel is actually doing, and if this has really affected any of their existing contracts with things like Japan Rail. Is
that flawed steel ending up in Japanese cars?
That was, yes, some car parts were affected by this. I think airplanes and bullet trains were the bigger priority and were more affected, but I think car makers were affected by this as well. So it's obviously a huge hit to Japanese industry generally, I would say, to one that prides itself on its reputation for excellence and meticulous manufacturing. I think this is a bit of a black eye.
Well, back in the 60s, of course, Japan was notorious for shoddy goods, and then in the 80s, the best you could buy was Japanese. Are people now scared to buy Japanese products?
Some maybe. Probably this has not ultimately crashed all confidence in Japan overall, but I think you're right. This is perhaps maybe a return to the bad old days, and probably more of a sign. I would think this. I don't want to put too much emphasis on this, but it is a sign that I think the high quality manufacturing is going to be turning to other markets, and already has to some extent, South Korea and others, and maybe one day China will be known for its high quality, meticulous manufacturing, just as a consequence of the global trade flows and how they've changed so drastically over the last couple of decades.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after the break.
Aben Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and the Yukon. Trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the pink symbol ABN-AF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Aben's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at abenresources.com.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome back. We're speaking with James Corbett. James, how was the reaction to Rex Tillerson being fired as U.S. Secretary of State?
I think the overall reaction is, I would say tentative relief of a sort, and not necessarily because of Tillerson or his policies or anything, but more so the fact that the State Department under Tillerson has not really been reliable as a diplomatic negotiating partner for anyone in the Asia-Pacific region or in the world generally, because everyone knows whatever Tillerson says or doesn't say doesn't really matter. Ultimately, what Trump vetoes or overrules is going to be the ultimate decider in any of these negotiations. So it's been a very ineffectual State Department so far, a kind of remarkably ineffectual State Department. So I think a lot of the leaders in Asia-Pacific would be happier if Pompeo or whoever gets sworn in as the next Secretary of State has a little bit more credibility in terms of actually being a reliable mouthpiece for U.S. foreign policy. So at the very least, that the countries in this region can actually determine what U.S. foreign policy really is.
Well, with the head of the CIA taking over the Secretary of State position, They say most spying is about economics anyway. Do you think he's well placed to have some kind of an economic play in the White House?
I think so. I think this is actually a remarkably on the nose appointment because, of course, famously, I think one of the most common covers for intelligence operatives of any country is in the State Department, in diplomatic machinery. There's usually a cover at the embassies in various countries. So, I mean, the ties between the CIA and the State Department are manifold and deep. And you raised another important point, which is that, yes, economic espionage is one of the primary missions, I think, of any intelligence agency. So I think there will be some very informed policy making going on in the State Department, perhaps even more so than usual when it comes to matters of spycraft.
Speaking of spies, the former Russian spy who was poisoned with nerve gas along with his daughter and 19 other people as well, as it turns out. Do you think the Russians were behind it?
Well, I think if they were remarkably, almost unbelievably stupid. Because it strikes me that the 007s of the ex-Soviet Union would not be so stupid as to use the only weapon that would be immediately and conclusively point back directly to them. It does seem a bit suspicious to me that that's the case, and the fact that the UK government is demanding some sort of response from Russia on this before they have even submitted any samples to the OPCW, an international chemical weapons arbiter that looks into cases like these. None of the samples have been submitted yet. There hasn't been any conclusive determination of the vector or the source of this attack. So I think it's a bit suspicious. It seems like this is part of the ginned-up campaign that's going on right now to demonize Russia in every way, in every possible form. And this is obviously, as I believe the Russian ambassador recently pointed out, not a game that people should play lightly because, of course, Russia is a nuclear superpower. So, as I believe the ambassador was quoted as saying, you do not give ultimatums to a nuclear superpower. And that seems about right. Unfortunately, the people who are at least putting forward or putting some of the brakes on the headlong rush towards World War III, like Jeremy Corbett in British Parliament, are being mocked and ridiculed for even suggesting that perhaps we should try to find some more of the evidence before we go around pointing fingers. So I think it's a very diplomatically charged incident, and unfortunately just a sign of the fact that relations between Russia and the West are at one of their lowest points in history. I would say this is directly comparable to the depths of the Cold War.
The president of the Philippines has decided to withdraw from the International Criminal Court. Is that a sign that he's going to be even harsher to his citizens?
Well, it's certainly possible. I'm not sure how much harsher Duterte could get, but it's obviously a sign that that he knows that he's in the crosshairs of the International Criminal Court, so he's going to withdraw to avoid any sort of prosecution, or at least, if not conviction, then he'll escape the enforcement mechanisms of the ICC. So I think this is probably a pretty predictable result of the way things have been heading since Duterte came into power, I believe in 2016, or was it 2017? But he has obviously been running afoul of the UN and various other international agencies that have been in the Philippines. So this is, I think, pretty predictable, and as you say, perhaps a sign of even stricter crackdowns to come.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after this.
Arctic Star Exploration, operated by a team of proven mine finders, is focused on diamonds in Finland and the Northwest Territories of Canada. A work program is planned for our Finland property that contains diamond-bearing kimberlite. Arctic Star trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ADD, and the Frankfurt Exchange, symbol 82A1. Please visit our website at arcticstar.ca or call us at 604-689-1799.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with James Corbett. James, how did the Asian markets react to this possible trade war between China and the U.S.?
Well, it's difficult to sort out exactly what they're reacting to, and how much of that is attributable to potential trade wars. But at any rate, we do know that throughout this period right now, the last few days of Tillerson being ousted and trade war concerns, stocks have been falling throughout Asia. The Nikkei 225 was off almost 1 percentage point the other day. The Topix slipped 0.5 percentage point. In Seoul, the KOSPI was down. The Hang Seng Index was down. So stocks have been down pretty much across the board. And I think, again, I don't know how much is directly attributable to the news headlines of the last couple of days, but I think to some extent, investors here are collectively holding their breath and waiting to see what's going to happen.
China announced that its industrial output for the year was up 7.2%, beating their standard prediction of 6.7%, which they seem to make every year. Are those numbers believable?
As usual, I would say that I wouldn't trust them down to the tenth of a decimal point and all of that. I think, broadly speaking, those numbers are just indicators of direction, whether things are growing or shrinking, and whether they're growing or shrinking faster or slower than expected. So I would take that, obviously, with a grain of salt, but I think it is probably broadly accurate in sort of general terms that China is absolutely performing perhaps better than would have been expected. As is Japan, actually. Q4 results have come out and showed that the Japanese economy was up 1.6% in the fourth quarter of last year. So again, I think just generally there are some good economic data that's come out recently, although it's very questionable whether that will maintain into 2018.
How are Japan's regional banks doing?
Well, the banking sector here has been questionable at best over the last couple of decades. There's a lot of zombie banks in the Japanese economy that have been propped up essentially by government aid since the popping of the bubble, and it hasn't greatly improved in recent decades, let's put it that way. So because the tide was never allowed to go out, we still don't really know who's wearing the swimming trunks and who isn't. But I think a lot of the regional banks find themselves in a position where they're not exactly booming, and there's not a huge amount of regional activity going on in some of the outer regions of Japan to justify any sort of booming outlook for any of these banks. It's just that they're geographically necessary, I think, and economically necessary to have some regional banks in various outposts throughout Japan, but throughout the urbanization that has been obviously going on throughout the world, but especially so in Japan over the last several decades, I think we see essentially most of the economy aggregating within the top 3 or 4 Japanese banks.
Could there be any roadblocks to Shinzo Abe becoming Japan's longest-serving prime minister?
Well, there is one right now that is developing, and it remains to be seen to what extent this is going to really have an effect on Abe. But him and his wife are involved in a scandal right now that's developing around this school that his wife had some sort of role in, and it was found that they were granting political favors to this school, and the person who was in charge of, I think it was, I can't remember which person involved in the school, but has just recently committed suicide, and things are not looking good. And it's very possible that this could, the mud could ultimately end up on Abe and his wife. So it still remains to be seen exactly, but at any rate, the opposition groups here in Japan are certainly making some sort of political hay out of this scandal, and it's quite possible. In fact, it would be, I think, the norm in Japanese politics for something like this to ultimately bring Abe down, because, as you say, or as you imply, Japanese prime ministers generally do not last very long, and Abe has already been in several years now. So I think the time may be up on the Abenomics regime.
Are companies still supplying luxury goods to North Korea despite the sanctions?
That is a good question. I would assume from your question that you have some information on that?
Yeah, we have indications that, yes, well, you never see the so-called glorious leader want for anything. He still drives luxury cars. They got to come in somehow. They don't make them.
Yeah. Yes, well, I have heard the reports that Singapore has been involved in selling luxury goods to North Korea illegally, but I think that's still under investigation, or at least the report I don't believe has actually come out yet. So we'll have to see to what extent that's happening and what firms are involved. But as you say, the fact that those types of goods exist anywhere in North Korea, and of course are being used by Kim Jong-un and others in his orbit, is a sign that someone is supplying them in some manner. And they're likely coming from either China or one of its related allies there.
Are there high hopes for the summit between Trump and Kim Jong-un?
There are hopes, yeah. There are high hopes. But I think that at this point they are only hopes. We'll have to really wait and see what the actual details of the meeting are going to be. Where and when will it take place, and under what terms, and what's the end goal of the negotiations. I think, myself personally, and I think a lot of other people who are watching this, are not exactly holding their breath that this is the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and the end of all problems. But at any rate, it is a step in the right direction towards diplomacy. So we'll have to wait to see what develops. But I think at this point, people are hopeful that we have turned a corner on this issue.
James, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you for having me on.
My guest has been James Corbett, publisher of thecorbettreport.com. He was speaking to us from Japan. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at HowStreet. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Questions for the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.